Sarah looked at the peculiar pointed arch. The steeply pitched roofs and front-facing gables of the manor gave a different feeling in her mind. A burnt window hanged from behind the manor. She walked slowly over the pavement towards the house and reflected on her deserted surroundings. She had always hated the creepy Morrison Manor with its old Gothic look and lone surroundings. It was a place that encouraged her tendency to feel afraid. It was after 12 years that she was stepping into this manor. The wind blew hard, making Sarah worried. It would rain soon. October's in Aldona is not good at all. The onset of winter brings in storms and rains. The area frequents cyclone. She knocked at the door with her feeble hands. Knock, knock once, twice, and the third times no one opened the door. Alicia was supposed to be here to open the door for her. She must be inside, but why would she not open the door, thought Sarah. She pushed the door a little hard. With a click sound, the door opened. She opened the door wide. It made a horrible screeching noises as if no one had touched it since ages. She entered the manor. The room was dimly lit, but was warm. It was chilly outside, but it looked like the warmth inside was, by its nature, relaxing. Sarah felt the warmth in her body and was relieved a little from the biting cold. She shut the door behind her immediately. She could smell fresh cookies being baked. Alicia still baked such beautiful and mouth-watering cookies, she thought. "Alicia? Alicia, where are you?" She called out, the words as if echoed back to her. As they all sat around the big table. There was some clatter of dishes and soft whistle from the kettle. Sarah tiptoed into the kitchen and peeped in. There was no one, just the large kettle on the stove, where the water was kept to boil for the tea. The cup and the saucer arranged, and the tea bag dipped in, ready to be served. On a dish there were fresh cookies that Sarah smelled of. Alicia must have prepared them for me, but where is she? She must have gone to the weekly market to fetch some vegetables and fruits. Usually the weekly market sets up on the riverbed of the Mapusa River. Localites look forward to the weekly market as the city was far off, and to fetch any product from there would be tiresome and invest the entire day. She was exhausted and suffering from jet lag, and a travel of almost 2 hertz from the Goa International Airport to Aldona made her feel stressed. Things have changed since she left for her higher studies. The roads were concrete and broad now. The highways connected the towns. She did not have to wait for any vehicle at the airport. It was simple. She hired a taxi direct to Morrison Manor. The only thing that did not change was this manor. She had observed that while entering. The manor stood still on a huge acre of land, no neighborhood nearby. The building stood erect but was surrounded by swamps and wild hedges. The moss had eaten off most of the plasters on the wall, and the bricks popped out in few of the places, giving it a look of a Gothic manor. She was just 6 when she lost her parents and left this house. The memories were still fresh in her mind. Something hissed in the kitchen. The water had boiled. Sarah prepared for herself a cup of tea. It's soothing after a journey. She must take a hot shower. Thinking, she sipped the tea. It had started to drizzle outside. Sarah looked towards an open window. The drizzle was now turning into big drops and started to splash upon her face. It felt good. It reminded her of her childhood, when she would make paper boats and float them on the water, and used to be scolded by her mother for getting herself wet. She had been missing her parents. An itching pain brought out a drop of tear in her eyes. She wiped it and slowly took to the stairs to her room. The room was made well. She was so tired that she thought to lay down, but she needed a hot shower to lighten herself. She entered her bathroom. Hot water was made ready for her. Alicia still was so caring. She must have heated the water for her, Sarah thought. The bathroom still had the same fresh smell of jasmine. She remembered her mother using the fragrance of jasmine. Alicia had kept the house as it was when she left. She opened her clothes and dipped herself in the warm water. Her eyes were heavy and she closed them. "Sarah, Sarah, don't run away. You have grown naughty now." A tingling voice made Sarah open her eyes. She saw a little girl run all over the house in a little pink dress, and her mom running behind her, scolding and pleading her to stop running across the room. The door opened with a bang and someone barged in ferociously. Huge men stood there guarding the door. The little girl stopped all of a sudden and gazed at the men. The mother had strikes of fear over her face. She gasped. The little girl counted the men. 1, 2, 3. There was fearful smile on the face of each man. They looked like demons. One of them had a scar on the face, stood there smiling like devil. Possibly he was the boss. The mother shrieked, and within seconds, another man flipped and held her by the arms so that she doesn't run away with her child. The boss moved towards the scared little girl, who was now shifting towards her mom, trying to find shelter. The boss knelt down in front of the little girl and spoke. "I am your uncle, baby. Are you scared of me?" The little girl looked at her mother with pale eyes. "Don't you dare touch my daughter," screamed the mother. The boss burst into a loud laugh, but this was not humanly. As if a fierce wolf was howling. "Just leave or else I will call the cops." The laugh grew louder. The huge man moved towards the mother now. "What did you say? Call the cops?" He laughed again. The laugh suddenly was interrupted when the third man who was in the position and guarding the door fell upon his face. With a jerk, both the goons looked towards the door. Their villagers holding sticks, axes, screamed and warned the men to leave. They were 10 or 20 and the men were 3/4 of a dozen men. But they had de-loaded guns. The boss sprang out his revolver and aimed at the little girl. He had grown mad, like a wild dog. He gripped the little girl in his arm, warning everyone to stop where they were or he would kill the girl, and backed up. He was not aware there was someone waiting on him from behind. There was a loud bang, and the man fell on the marble floor, leaving the little girl, blood oozing off his head. Leisha. Sarah's eyes opened. She was still in the bathtub. The incidents passed by as if they were happening to her now, when they happened to her 12 years back, and she was the little girl in pink. "Good," Mr. Cooper said. There had been dispute for this house for quite some time. A promoter and his goons had been bothering Sarah's parents, asking them to sell off the property with a good sum of money. However, Sarah's father, Richard Morrison, had always denied. The requests of the goons turned into threats. Slowly and gradually, they would attack the family, quite often. The family had lodged a complaint against them, but no go. The cops had always supported the promoter and his goon. They were powerful. The Morrison Manor was a historical structure for Aldona. The village was quiet, with almost 3,000 people. There were hardly any neighborhoods nearby. Every house was a distance. This manor was built by Richard's grandfather when they came to India to settle. Richard had never thought to give this house away to anyone. Sarah was young, so he wrote his will that until Sarah grew up to be 18, Alicia, Sarah's nanny, would take care of the property if something happens to the husband and the wife. Sarah remembered everything. She remembered how that evening Alicia saved her and her mother from the goons, hitting them from behind with a stick. She also remembered how the house was set on fire that night and her parents killed. The goons had attacked the Morrisons and killed them with the guns. For boarding, Alicia took little Sarah and ran out of the burning house from the back door. When the villager had seen the fumes and had reached out for help, they had caught the goons while they were trying to flee and had beaten them to death. Alicia, with the help of Father Patrick of the local church, had sent Sarah to her aunt in USA after a few days to look after, and she stayed back in the devastated manor, protecting it from any evil activities and keeping it safe for Sarah to hand over after she turned 18. Now, she had written just one letter in details to Sarah's aunt in 12 years, explaining about Sarah's inheritance. And now, when she was 18, she had come over to Aldona to inherit her property. Emily shuddered, sudden acceptance in the pit of her stomach. After the bath, she got ready and went downstairs. Dinner was waiting at the table. Had Alicia returned? She called out, "Alicia, Alicia, where are you?" Sarah felt a little quizzical since there seemed to be no one in the house, but she felt the existence of someone. Had Alicia grown mute or deaf due to age? Vincent asked. She had no power to think much. She must speak to Alicia in the morning. As of now, she should eat something and sleep. She was tired. He laid in bed, but as if the sleep was taken away from her. She shifted on her bed to and fro, but couldn't sleep. She woke up and strolled towards the balcony. She saw something, Dot asked. Experienced? No, someone who was bringing a pail of water from the well. A lady in apron. Sarah remembered. Alicia, there she was. She called out, "Alicia, Alicia." Alicia didn't look up. Sarah could not understand anything. She walked back to her bed and tried sleeping. When the door opened softly, the lady in apron came inside. The face could not be seen due to the dimmed light. A voice asked, "Are you not getting good sleep, dear?" "Alicia?" exclaimed Sarah. Alicia quietly came up to the bedside and whispered, "Let me put you to sleep," saying, so she started to move her fingers against Sarah's hair, gently, with affection, and singing a lullaby in a soft tone. Sarah didn't remember anything. She fell to sleep. Next morning, she woke up afresh, but what was wrong? She was half laid on a dirty sofa. It was hard, not as soft and cozy as she was on the bed last night. The room looked dirty, cobwebs everywhere. It seemed that Noon had cleaned the room since ages. Her sight shifted towards the dining table, where she had her dinner last night. Nothing was in there except for a thick layer of dust settled on top. The furniture was broken. The pictures on the wall were coated with dust and dirt, hanging upside down. Was she dreaming the whole night? Where was Alicia? She came over to Sarah last night. Sarah could not understand what was happening to her. Sarah could not understand what was happening to her. When her eyes fell upon a few letters which lay on the table, she picked them up and started reading. The letter was dated back to her second year's stay in USA, almost 11 years back. It said, "Dear Sarah, I know when you would get this letter I would not be here to hand you over your inheritance as promised to your dad, but since I promised, so would I do it. I am suffering from blood cancer, and the doctors had given me just the time of 6 months from now. The promoter had been houching upon this house like wolves waiting for the hunt. As soon as I die, they would take a grip of this property. At the moment, there could be legal steps, hence they are sitting back. But do not worry, my child. I would guard this house with my soul. I had always loved you as my child and protected this house for you. Nevertheless, these goons can take away my life, or the deadly disease can, but my soul will be here to guard the house and you. Your lovingly, Alicia." Sarah could not believe her eyes. Below the letter was a stamp paper talking about Sarah's inheritance to the property. She felt a drop of tear in her eyes. She ran out of the house, shouting, "Alicia, Alicia, where are you?" She thought she heard him say. Somewhere in some place a smile erupted on Alicia's face. "From now on, the Morrison Manor will no longer be haunted." Lieutenant Sowers frowned. The joyous laughter of cheerful children were echoing as they were running and playing happily outside, while she was singing a song in her childish voice, which she heard from somewhere, and cleaning the dirty utensils from her small hands, totally losing herself in her chore. Still, sometimes she also wanted to play. But how could she when she had so much of the work? Memshab would scold her if she didn't do the work properly, and beat her as well. She was so scared from Memshab's anger, so she could not go out to play. But still sometimes, when no one was looking, she quickly got up from her place, and silently tiptoed to the window and looked outside to the beaming faces of giggling children, and used to smile, wondering how fun it would be for them. Ah, hiriseur, wouldn't it? But as soon as she heard footsteps of someone's coming, she quickly went back to her place in fear, and used to lower her gaze so that no one could know she was looking through the window pane before they came into the kitchen. 8 years was her age. It seemed like she was a child. Well, she was, but she didn't have any childhood for real. Her whole day went doing work for Memshab. Sometimes, when she used to make some mistakes, she had to have a tight slap on her cheeks, but that was totally fine, because her mother was ill, and she had a brother as well who was of 2 years, and her father, well, he left them on their own for another woman. Her mother was illiterate and also very sick, so she couldn't do the work. Therefore, the whole household responsibility was on that small 8-year-old life named Masoom. And it was not something new for Masoom. She was doing it from the age of 6. Once when she was 6, she was unable to hold the hot cup from her small hands and spilled it all over on her. She still had those burnt marks, but now at least she could do the work properly. The path to Memsab's house from her house had a school in between. She didn't like to take that path, didn't know why she felt sad using that path, so she used to avoid that path and took long path instead. Still, her fate bumped her to the children clad in uniform of that school, but she used to ignore and just kept her focus on her work. But her life took a turn one day. It was like a normal day, the same things were happening. She was busy in her work, when Badi Shab came and rang the bell. Badi Shab was Memshab's husband. Masoom, go open the door, Memshab ordered. Masoom cleaned her hands and went to the door, standing on her toes for reaching the doorknob, opening the door. Badi Shab smiled. He had something in his hands. It was a big cage, and the cage had 2 beautiful parrots in it. Masoom's little eyes got widened in wonder. Her dried lips had a cute smile. Masoom, call your Memsha, Bait Shab ordered. Masoom ran to her Memsha and she came outside. Memsha had her hands on her cheeks in excitement. Wow, what is this? They are wonderful, she said, with pure bliss. Badshab smiled proudly and said, these parrots aren't some ordinary parrots. These are very expensive. Each is of 4,000 rupees. But I bring them for your love of birds. Now take care of them properly. Memshab grinned broadly and said, oh, thank you so much, my dear hubby. I will take care of them properly and won't let them fly. Then she looked at Masoom and said, Masoom helped me take them to the kitchen. I will hang them there, so Masoom can see our expensive parrots, and also any cat won't come there, so there are better there. She was in love with those parrots. Every day, even at home, she used to talk about them. She used to think like she got new friends. She used to talk with the 2 of them. Amma said parrots can talk, Quab and Quaish. One day you 2 will talk with me too, she said, smiling from below while peeling the vegetables. But suddenly she saw Quab and Quaish getting uncomfortable. They were banging at the cage violently, flapping their wings. She quickly got up and questioned, what happened, Quab and Quaish? Why are you behaving like this? But the birds were busy violently shaking the cage in the direction of the window. When Masoom's eye got to the side of window, and she noticed a big flock of birds flying across the sky. Oh, now, I understand you 2 want to get out too, don't you? She said, and the birds flapped their wings towards her like they could understand her and were saying yes. She smiled and said, "Let me help you." She brought a chair and stood on it. But she was still short, so she brought a stool, placed it on that chair, and started climbing on it. Now she was on the top. Her eyes shined for the birds. She smiled at them and said, "Don't worry, Quab and Quaish, I am there." But as soon as she moved her hands towards the caged door, Memshab came in the kitchen and yelled, "Masoom, what are you doing?" Masoom's legs shuddered in fear, taking her balance off and making her fall. Her legs and hands were brutally peeled off, and her chin was wounded as well. She was bleeding all over and wincing in pain, trying to blow her wounds with the air of her lips, but they were hurting badly. Tears were mixed with her bloods, but before she could do anything, Memshab came towards the little girl and slapped her tightly, holding her up from her elbow. She looked into the crying girl's eyes with sheer anger and shouted, "What were you trying to do? You know how much those parrots cost. If you ever touch my parrots again, I will break all bones in your body. Understand?" Shaking the soul out of her body. Then she left her there and went to look at her parrots. "Don't worry, my dearies. That filthy girl's hands will never try to touch you again," she said to the parrots, and then looked at the little child in disgust and went off. Masoom had all 5 fingers on her face imprinted. She wrapped her in herself, shivering and crying without a stop, feeling the pain from her bleeding body parts. Then she got up, still shivering, like a leaf in autumn, and tried to wipe her blood from the dirty cloth and water when the bleeding stopped. She started working again. Now, she was more focused on her work than usual. She wouldn't even bat an eye to Quab and Quash. Didn't matter how much violently they shook their cage or how much violently they flapped their wings when they saw a flock of birds. She just lowered her gaze, showing she wasn't paying any attention, though she felt as restless as the birds in the cage. They were her friends. They wanted freedom. But she knew if she tried to do anything, then Memshab wouldn't show any more mercy to her, and she would be ruthlessly beaten. It was a very big dilemma for her. But her fear chose to ignore the parrots, though she was feeling guilty for it from inside. The sound of every day's marching band talking about how hopelessly they felt their future. Again, the days become the same, just with extra horrible for Masoom, who was experiencing so many emotions. One day no one was home, and Masoom had finished her work, so she was sitting on the chair. Her head was lying on table. She was told to take care of the house in Memshab's absence. The day was usual again, with the usual cheerful sounds of children playing. But now, those sounds didn't thrill Masoom anymore. She only used to think about the agony of 2 parrots. And the incident happened on the day she tried to free the parrots. Fear crawled into her chest whenever she thought about that incident. Suddenly, her attention caught by Quab and Quaish, who once again became restless, seeing the flock of birds flying outside. This time they were way more violent. Quaish called out, but little Massimo turned her gaze on the other side and said, "I know you want to go outside, but I am sorry I cannot set you free. Otherwise, Memshab will beat me so much, so forgive me." And she bent her head on the table and shut her eyes tightly. But she could not ignore the chaos the birds were making. She covered her ears with her hands to block the noise made by the birds. She didn't want to get hurt again. But again, she slowly turned her gaze upwards to look at the birds, and what she saw put her into horror. The bird's wings were bleeding now, but they still wanted to get out and fly in the sky so badly that they didn't stop. Now she was more anxious. She had to quickly find the solution, and a thought stroked through her mind. What if I say that the cat ate the birds? Then Memshab won't doubt me, she thought to herself. And she didn't think much and didn't let another thought invade her mind and start getting the same chair and stool to get the birds free out of the cage. The table was so heavy so she could not use it. She opened the window first, set the chair and the stool upon it, and started climbing towards the top. The birds became less violent seeing her. Don't worry, Quab and Quaish. You want to fly in the sky, you will fly okay, she said with smile and assurance, and without thinking, once again she opened the cage door and set the birds free in the sky. The birds happily came out and fly high, much higher than they had been flying, and little Masoom saw her friends going away from her while she was happily saying bye to them, waving her hands in the sky and smiling cheerfully. It was not that she never smiled before, but it was the first time when her smile was as beautiful as the children of her age, and the children she used to see playing outside. The birds were now banished in sky, and she was still smiling, hanging on the window. She was feeling blissed, but her bliss also vanished as soon as she heard the voice of Memshah yelling her name in the anger that could match thundering clouds in the sky, roaring out of her mouth as she lost herself in prayer. The sky had darkened to blackness. Poor Masheb was beating so loudly that it would come out of her chest. She was drawn into herself, walking backward as Memsheb was coming towards her. She wanted to tell Memsheb her planned lie, but she wasn't able to utter anything. Her eyes were already raining. She was stammering and sobbing and couldn't even tell a single word properly. But now it was too late. Memshab came towards her and slapped the girl so tightly that her head banged to the near table. What did I tell you about the birds, you filthy little girl? What did I tell you? Cheap girls don't understand so easily. Today, I will teach you a good lesson. She growled at the little girl in anger and slapped her twice. She pushed her onto the floor and went to the bedroom to fetch Badshab's leather belt. The girl was still lying down there in fear. She came and started lashing on her, and the little girl screamed in immense pain, saying sorry for the mistake she did. She was continuously begging Memshab to stop lashing her, telling her she would not do it again, but Memshab was deaf in her anger. You will do it again if you get the chance, but after today you won't get a chance to repeat the same mistake again. You cheap garbage. Memshab growled at her once again. The little girl was bleeding now from the lashing. Her wounds, which were about to heal, opened once again. Masoom wasn't even able to scream in pain now from the pain. Saliva was coming out of her cheeks, and her whole clothes were little torn. Her eyes started getting closed too. Darkness surrounded her. Now all the possible movements from Masoom were stopped. Her eyes were closed. She was as still as the water in the scenery drawn by a little kid. Memshab's anger had also come down now, but she was sweating heavily from beating Masoom. She sat at the chair for catching her breath as she was panting heavily, while Masoom was still laying on the floor. Memshab poured herself a glass of water and started drinking it and asked Masoom to get up now. But Masoom didn't respond. She yelled her name again, but still there was no response. She thought that Masoom was fainted, so she poured the water she was drinking on her to wake her up, but she was still a lying statue. So Memshab tried to move her from the help of her foot. But as she moved her body, she found that the small Masoom was no more there. The small Masum's soul was also free from her body, like the birds from the cage. She gave her life to the freedom of the birds. She paid the price of freedom from her life, but should she be called a freedom fighter? If she could be called a freedom fighter, she would be youngest.